Hello again. Hello everyone. Welcome on the set. Now we're going to deal for the coming hour with a topic which is really a hot topic in many regards, climate change due to human activities and greenhouse gas emissions. And recent news made it clear to us that we have a climate emergency now. Forest fires, which are more frequent and more intense, droughts, floods, temperature, which are out of the range. And these are visible consequences of dramatic changes in the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Every year, extreme weather events are on the increase. They were exceptional and they are becoming a standard now in our regions even. And our speakers will mention that solutions exist in order to try and contain a temperature rise to 1.5 degrees maximum. If you are online, please act and react in the social media with the LSF 2021 hashtag. Our first guest is Célia Sapart, Director Communications and Climate Science at CU2 Value Europe. Célia, you are a climatologist and you're an expert. You belong to the experts panel which do proofreading on the IPCC report on climate change. Which are the latest findings of this report and which are the first avenues we could get started working on? Hello and hello to everybody. The sixth IPCC report on the physical state of our climate was published in August, and the results are alarming. In 100 century, global temperature increased by 1.2 degrees, and it is now clear and unequivocal that this is due to human activities. This global warming up of the atmosphere, of oceans, and this is impacting the planet, the whole planet, in many ways. And if we look at the climate data we could get from ice cores, but also analyzing the atmosphere, the composition in the past, we see that we have a very steep rise in temperature over a little spell of time, and the accumulation of CO2 and nitrous oxide, which is a potent greenhouse gas, are very high. Our situation now is highly critical, and we need to do everything to contain global warming. The impact of our greenhouse gas emissions are extreme weather events, an acceleration and intensification and rise in frequency of such events like hurricanes, torrential rain episodes, droughts. And the more we emit greenhouse gases, the more we have a temperature rise and the more we have extreme weather events. And we talked about this in the future, like sci-fi, but the events in the recent weeks have shown us that this is no sci-fi. We're experiencing this already today, and the weather events we experienced in the past 5-6 years are becoming the new standard for the near future, and this will get even worse if we don't do anything to counter that. Human activities are the main driver for the climate. We still have some control on this Earth thermostat, if we call it like that. But if we go over the 2.5 degrees of global warming, we are going to lose control because we will have reached a tipping point. you will have our ice caps are already melting fast, but if we have more than 1.2 or 2 degrees of global warming, this melting process could accelerate because you will have some melted water beneath the ice caps. Those will melt more rapidly, and the water levels will rise, and we will get out of the control zone. Think of this permafrost in the Arctic areas. They are also warming up, and methane is freed, is released, and the more we have global warming, the more greenhouse gases are released, and this in turn will accelerate global warming. As you said, and as has been said a lot of times today, we need to do everything we can from today on in order to cease emitting greenhouse gases. We also need to act to protect and regenerate natural carbon sinks which capture atmosphere CO2 like trees and vegetation, but we also need to develop technological carbon sinks, artificial carbon sinks. We need to combine low-tech and high-tech solutions. There is no magic bullet except frugality, and we insist on that. We need to consume less energy, to consume less altogether, produce less. We should become frugal, and without becoming frugal, we are not going to be able to tackle climate change. So we need to take all aspects together. Thank you, Célia. Thank you. In order to give us a more precise idea of Luxembourg's impact, we are going to welcome Christina Ehlert. Now who is a member of the Superior Council for Sustainable Development, CSDD, in Luxembourg, dealing in a systemic fashion with these challenges. It is a think tank which raises awareness for climate change and sustainable development. It is funded by Luxembourg's government. Christina, hello. We heard Célia about the global warming and its consequences worldwide. What about Luxembourg? In order to get some mapping of greenhouse gas emission sources in Luxembourg, the government has commissioned a study survey on this. Hello, Sophie, hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me on behalf of CSDD to this forum. And this forum shows it for companies and for us individuals. There is no question anymore of do we need to act on the dimensions of climate change, or we need to do something also with regard to social foundations. The CSDD dealt with environmental footprints in Luxembourg and greenhouse gas emissions. And Kate Woolworth shaped this donut theory, because in one picture you can see both dimensions, the actions on the planet's limits and the reaction on fundamental needs, human needs. She wanted to express how human and business activities can take place in a specific, secure and sustainable framework if they take both dimensions displayed here into account. And this is a good tool and can be inspiring for companies as well as for us and political players. To come back to CSDD's work, last year we wanted to understand which pressure human activity is exerting on the planet, activities performed in Luxembourg. For this, we used a well-known method, which is the environmental footprint, which has been developed by the Global Footprint Network. And the carbon footprint is a part of this analysis. How does it work? The global footprint is expressed in global hectares. That is, which demand in terms of surface is exerted by a specific activity, and for carbon, this is which surface is necessary to absorb, to capture your CO2 emissions. The carbon footprint also refers to the surface area which is necessary to produce resources and absorb waste and emissions. We can have a look at the results in the year 2018. We have a global overview. For 2018, Luxembourg's demand in global hectares was 7.6 million hectares, whereas the biocapacity, it's not here on the chart, but you can see our data on our website. The biocapacity, that is the available surface in order to produce resources and absorb emissions, amounts only to 800,000 global hectares. And per capita, it's on the right chart. Per inhabitant, the surface demand is 12.7 hectares, global hectares, and this is more than twice our neighbors in France and Germany. Even if we correct the effects of, or take the effects of fuel tourism, car fuel tourism in Luxembourg. And there is an increase. These data show the development over time. We compared the data from 2008 with 2018, and there is an increase in absolute terms, but also per capita. Well, based on these results, Christina, which are the recommendations the CSDD would like to make? We're still analyzing data which are even more relevant. We want to go further in order to better communicate on the details of this carbon footprint on our website, myfootprint.lu, and we're going to get into a conversation with different players in order to test the levers with political players, companies, and citizens. But I'm going to deal rather with the company-relevant aspects. For today, we find these results very alarming, and we would like to mobilize companies in Luxembourg, and the Higher Council for Sustainable Development would like companies to deal with this, aiming at excellence and being ambitious. Our first finding is that each and every company should understand their emissions profile. I'm meaning scope 1, 2, and 3. One is direct emissions linked to combustion. Scope 2 is indirect emissions, electricity, power consumption, and scope 3, all the emissions in the value chains, grey energy, people, transportation, etc. This is the necessary basis to be able to act. And now, with regard to being ambitious, we have tools at hand in order to determine how much we should contribute in terms of quantitative data. We're going to hear more later, but the reductions in scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are necessary. We need to talk about energy efficiency, frugality, reducing consumption, and reducing GHG emissions. And compensation, that is offsetting, is really the last resort. Thank you very much, Christina. These are severe, alarming findings, and Luxembourg has its share in the responsibility. And some awareness raising and information work is necessary in order to create change within society. And this is what we are contributing to at IMS Luxembourg, and would like to call Frédéric Meis to the set. Frédéric, you're a project manager with IMS Luxembourg. You're more especially in charge of what we call Science-Based Target and Climate Action Luxembourg Task Force. Hello, Sophie. Like you said, part of the change still involves raising awareness, sharing knowledge and good practices, and proposing solutions, concrete solutions, how to respect the commitments made and keep the increase in temperature to maximum 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is why, since March 2021, IMS has launched a working group called Science-Based Target and Climate Action Luxembourg Task Force. Science-based targets on the one side, because the main objective of the program is to help our member companies set and achieve their greenhouse gas emission reduction targets in line with what climate science tells us. It is inspired by the Science-Based Target Initiative, SBTI, which was jointly created by the Carbon Disclosure Programme, the United Nations Global Compact, the World Resources Institute, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature in 2015. And there is Climate Action Task Force on the other side, because the program aims to create a collaborative platform where everyone can exchange on the subject of climate action and learn from experts and organizations already engaged in the process, and create synergies to help ensure that IMS member organizations are a driving force for climate action in Luxembourg. The working group currently brings together 45 member organizations or companies of the IMS network, 28% of them law firms and consulting firms, 22 in the financial sector, and 15 energy and industry. And public players are also represented in the task force, and as of now, 18 of them has confirmed they intend to enter a process of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. They meet every 6 weeks within workshops where we can explain what steps are to be done and to help demystify complex things to be done, and they can share their experience and difficulties they might encounter. We could see the process, discover initiatives like from SBTI, like the Net Zero Initiative or a climate pledge, but also to find out concretely where the emissions come and quantify them. And the latest workshop was about determination of or definition of targets and which basis years were to be used. And the next workshop will deal more specifically with Scope 3 emissions, indirect emissions, which are not directly linked with manufacturing a product, but with other stages in its life cycle. And it's more complex, and we will see how to quantify and reduce them. Thank you so much, Frédéric. We have seen that raising awareness and explaining the phenomenon of global warming invites us to change our ways of working, of operating, to rethink them, and it's urgent to meet commitments made at international level. We're going to give the floor to organizations who are going to tell us about their initiatives to reduce their environmental impact and to contribute to developing solutions. Let us welcome Olivier Vassart, CEO of Stelligence, which is a subsidiary of ArcelorMittal. Olivier, ArcelorMittal is a world-renowned company, the largest steel and mining company in the world, and it is thus a major emitter of greenhouse gases. Could you tell us what initiatives you're putting in place to face the challenge? First, ArcelorMittal Group has a worldwide production base. We do not only produce in Europe, and we have made commitments to reduce our GHG emissions, which are considerable. Until 2030, we are going to reduce by 25% our global GHG emissions, and we aim at reaching carbon neutrality by 2050, not only in Europe, but worldwide. How or why are we able to make this commitment now? Because We have been working on this topic of decarbonization for decades. We're developing that with the market players, with startup companies, with academics, and have been developing technologies which are reaching the industrial stage. We are setting up new pilot steel-making lines which will allow us to decarbonize what we call our blast furnaces, that is factories which use iron ore and coal to create steel, to make steel. We will implement technologies which will help reduce the environmental impact of such blast furnaces. We have reached the industrial pilot scale for new technologies. It's not R&D anymore. Will be able to produce steel without emitting carbon, so we won't have to capture CO2. We have an industrial pilot line in Hamburg, and in Spain we can produce steel directly from iron ore and hydrogen. And there is another point which shouldn't be neglected. This is recycling of steel. Steel is a highly recycled material today. And if we think of our industrial assets in Luxembourg, where we produce over 3 million tons in Luxembourg, but all steel is made from scrap steel, there are hardly any direct carbon GHG emissions in Luxembourg because we are dealing with recycling steel. Can you give us some examples for concrete applications for these new steels? You can find steel everywhere. If you have a look around yourself, you will find it in your car, in your buildings, in your washing machines, in rails for train transport, etc. We work a lot with our customers. Let's think of car makers, for example. We have a research facility in France which deals solely with car design. We don't work only on material properties. We collaborate with car makers in order to co-design the car and help them save steel in the cars you will and are using every day. We want to have less material use to fulfill the same needs. And we work at this with car makers, but also in the appliance industry. And we are also very active in the building industry. Where could you give us more precise examples in the building sector? Steel is a material which is very much used and widely used in the building industry. Steel is not the solution for buildings. The solution is a combination of materials, and using the right material at the right place. We shouldn't be focused on concrete or wood or steel. The one thing is using the right material at the right place in buildings. And we have two small examples in Luxembourg with my friend Bruno Renders from the Training Institute for the Building Industry. We just completed a building which is a greenhouse built on top of a company cafeteria. And this greenhouse is not only there to produce vegetables. The whole concept has been embedded in the local buildings surroundings, and in office buildings we breathe, that is, we emit CO2. The CO2 concentration, for example, in this very room is higher than outside. And in this greenhouse, this CO2 from the building can be recycled directly to grow vegetables. This is a pilot now, but this can be installed in many other places. And another project which is impending with IFSB, that is a training institute for the building area, is office buildings and industrial buildings which will be entirely dismantleable. we rethink the structure of the building, and thanks to steel, which can be easily assembled and disassembled, we're going to build buildings which we can change, dismantle, rebuild somewhere else without any problems. We need to work on the material, but also on the use of this material or the uses of these materials by our customers. Thank you, Olivier, for this information about new ways of producing new products with an increasing focus on energy efficiency and the increasing use of renewables. And all this requires capital, a lot of financial resources. What about banks? What about the financial industry at large? Do they adapt? Do banks adapt their strategies in order to support and facilitate the kind of innovations we've been talking about? We are going to talk about that with Ulrich Fuhrmann from BNP Paribas Asset Management and Michael Finucane from the EIB, the European Investment Bank. We're going to talk about that with them. They are English speakers, so we'll switch languages.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You are co-head Environmental Strategies Group at BNP Paribas Asset Management. Yeah. What is the strategy of your funds to approach decarbonization and net zero?
Absolutely. I think to start with, we're in an industry on the asset management side that has the ability to really support and create an enormous amount of impact by allocating capital to companies that can really make a difference in regards to decarbonization, in regards to thinking about how we approach our natural capital. So the way that we approach it in the Environmental Strategies Group at BNP Paribas Asset Management is that we've defined climate change and grouped that into six distinct areas of climate change. The first three really around decarbonization and carbon emissions. And typically that'll evolve around what we call the energy transition. The reason energy transition is important is because the global energy system today is responsible for about 75% of global carbon emissions. And hence we're investing in solutions such as renewable energy production, energy technology and efficiency and materials, as well as infrastructure and transportation. So those are the areas that we need to invest in. In fact, if we want to go net zero, we need to allocate about $115 trillion of investments until 2050 in order to achieve the energy transition. And hence what we have is a fund that directly gives investors and retail investors the ability to support companies that are trying to go down that route. But what we shouldn't forget is that climate change is not just about carbon emissions. It's also about nature. And I think nature is an area that has really been underserved in the conversation around climate change. And hence what we've just recently launched in June is a fund that we've been working on for almost 3 years that really deals with how do you invest in natural capital. Natural capital being our oceans and water systems, our land, our food and forestry, as well as agriculture, and then also our urban settlements, as we've talked about earlier today. How do we create more sustainable buildings and cities? And hence those are three core ecosystems that play into each other, because the problem today is that we're consuming our natural capital about 1.75 times quicker than Earth can actually regenerate it. And hence we're trying to give investors the opportunity to help support and also invest and profit from companies that are going to address these important issues with solutions, because we have a firm belief that if you come up with a solution to a problem, you're going to earn some over normal profits. And hence it's the concept of dual returns, where we can both make great impact as well as having attractive returns for investors.
Ulrich, tell us, how are you measuring the impact of your funds?
Absolutely, and this is a part of the dual return, because our funds are not just measured on the returns that we're trying to make for our investors. It's of course also measured in particular on the environmental impact that we can facilitate through investments in our fund. And there we need to go back and think, well, how do we really have impact in public markets? When we invest in equities, how do we create impact? How do we support some of these companies? And what we do, we invest in all market capitalizations, all sizes, all regions. And when we can create a huge amount of impact is when we invest in both mid and small companies. So what we do every quarter for every single one of our funds is that we have a so-called climate and ESG report, where we can report on the carbon, on the waste, on the water footprint of the overall portfolio, how much carbon we're avoiding, how much waste we're recycling, how much water we're cleaning, because it's incredibly important that our investors have the transparency into what exactly the fund does and how it's helping the industries that they want to help through investments in our funds.
You mentioned public markets. How do you think about impact in public markets and its implementation across your portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is really an incredibly hot issue at the moment in terms of how to guide capital to actually support companies. And there we have the issue around ESG, so environmental, social, and governance issues, vis-a-vis what I would call thematic investments. Now, ESG investments, amongst other, are really biased towards thinking about how companies are operating and the amount of disclosure companies have in regards to performance and how they're signing up. And hence, whilst disclosure is important, what's really even more important for us is not so much the fact that companies are disclosing, but it's what are they actually doing to lower the carbon footprint or restore the natural capital. And hence, I think it's very important to differentiate between ESG investing on one side that encourage more disclosure, that is more heavy on what we call the how, vis-a-vis a different issue, which is really around impact, which is about what companies are doing. In other words, you can have a company that has wonderful disclosure, but actually very little impact in regards to what they're doing. And you have often companies that have potentially poor disclosure, particularly smaller companies, but have an enormous amount of impact in terms of the technologies and products that they're working on to address some of the most pressing issues that we have today. And that's what we think is impact. It's the focusing on the what companies are doing.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ulrich. So thanks to you, we've heard about the approach from and the actions taken by private sector financial institution. Let's have a look now at the approach from another type of actor, namely the European Investment Bank. Michael, good afternoon.
Hi, Sophie.
You work as climate officer at the EIB Climate Action and Environmental Coordination Division. How does the approach of the bank as a public policy-oriented lender differ from what we've just heard?
Super. Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here today to hope to demystify a little bit for you what it is EIB does, with particular reference to what we do with climate. You might see our big glass building up on Kirchberg and wonder precisely what it is that we do. The European Investment Bank, as you say, we are a public policy-driven institution. Public policy doesn't sound very glamorous, but when it comes to climate, it's actually very important. The EIB, we're owned by the EU member states, and we finance projects that are considered important for the European economy. So what I mean by that is we give loans and we give equity to private sector and public sector players who are investing in important areas such as innovation, infrastructure, or the topic of today, climate and the environment. The bank is big. We lend approximately 60 billion euros per annum. 90% of that is in the EU. Last year, in 2020, 40% of our total lending contributed to climate and environmental related projects, and that proportion is ever increasing. As we know, the current decade, 21 to 30, is the critical decade if we're to ensure that we remain within the 1.5 Celsius degree target, and it's going to require trillions for us to achieve those objectives. In recognition of that, EIB has launched its Climate Bank Roadmap, or CBR as we call it. This in essence outlines the steps that we're going to take over the next 5 years to ensure that we contribute in an even more meaningful way to that. This has a couple of dimensions. I will talk about the quantitative targets that we've set for ourselves later, but in terms of policy, EIB sees itself as the flag bearer of green policy within the EU. So what I mean by that is we'll be early stage adapters of policies that represent the line of flight for green finance in Europe. For example, this year we became the first bank to align all of its financing activities with the Paris Agreement. We're also aligning ourselves with the EU taxonomy. As you probably know, the EU taxonomy is a framework of definitions that allows us determine precisely what activities or investments are green, and it helps us all avoid greenwashing. Applying the EU taxonomy to our modus operandi means significant change for us. So it changes how we appraise projects and counterparts, how we report and disclose, for example. And we hope that by helping implement these policies, we help to mainstream these very important policies across Europe. And the goal at the end of the day is to ensure as much capital as possible goes to impactful green investments.
Thank you, Michael. So could you tell us more precisely how do you finance the change?
Okay, well, for us, there are a number of different perspectives. I've spoken already about the CBR and some of the policy driven commitments that we've made. But as I say, the bank has an impact in the real world. We lend, as I said, 60 billion per annum. From this year, we have set ourselves 2 very significant and ambitious quantitative targets. So by 2025, we aim to advance at least 50% of our green funding to green investments. And secondly, that will then help us achieve our second target, which is to support investment of up to and beyond 1 trillion euros by the end of 2030 in green investments. So how do we do that? Well, I suppose it comes down to engagement with a broad range of counterpart type, in operating in a broad range of sectors, investing in a broad range of projects. Likewise, our product offering needs to be broad and it needs to be relevant. So we offer facilities such as large-scale investment loans for large-scale infrastructure projects with public sector clients. We offer intermediated funding to SMEs, or small and medium enterprises. And we offer, for example, quasi-equity facilities for smaller, early-stage, high-tech driven innovative businesses. To that extent also, we're launching new green products which are aligned with the EU taxonomy, a green bond and a green loan offering, and they are based on the strong legacy we already have as being the first ever issuer 12 years ago of green bonds. And again, we're trying to speak to a real market demand for transparent and clear green debt facilities, which at the end of the day, again, the target being to ensure that as much capital as possible flows to those green projects that will help us meet the decarbonisation ambition.
So projects, yes, indeed. It's about projects. It's about concrete results. So could you share with us some concrete examples of projects that you are financing?
Sure. There are a lot of examples we could speak about. Last year, we financed over 25 billion euros worth of green investment, some of it in Luxembourg. We finance, as I say, a very broad range of project type. So, for example, large-scale infrastructure with a public sector body. In recent years, we've financed new rolling stock for CFL here in Luxembourg. The example I'm going to delve into a little bit more deeply is even closer to home and speaks to some of the points that were made earlier. So last month, EIB signed a 280 million euro loan with ArcelorMittal. The purpose of the funding is to support investment in green innovation that will help ArcelorMittal reduce its carbon footprint. It is an innovative project that speaks exactly to the sweet spots for EIB. So why is such a project important for EIB? First of all, it supports the decarbonisation of an energy-intensive industrial sector, and that's the very topic we're here to discuss today. Secondly, it involves investment in green innovation, and we all know how important the development of green technology will be in order for us to meet the step change to achieve the industrial decarbonisation targets that are set. And thirdly, it also speaks to our engagement with the private sector and encourages and helps to further catalyse private sector support, which is a key policy objective for us too.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. On l'a entendu.
As we have heard, redirecting financial resources towards solutions that are more in line with GHG reduction targets, as well as innovative solutions from companies, are avenues worth pursuing and which are essential. Another approach we regularly hear about is carbon offsetting. It is often presented as the magic bullet, the miracle solution to reducing CO2 in the atmosphere via one of its best-known forms, reforestation. But what is it all about exactly? We now welcome Édouard Lambrechts, President of Graines de Vie. It is an association which is active in reforestation in some African countries such as Togo, Benin, Madagascar, Cameroon or Ghana. Édouard, welcome. What is reforestation about and which results does it bring? Reforestation, I think you all have your little idea. It's made of planting trees to recreate forests, which have been defined by the UN. Internationally speaking, to call this a forest, you need a minimum size and tree density, but I don't think this was your question. You want to know what the concept and the perception behind this. And then it becomes highly interesting. We all know forests. We all agree on the fact that forests can capture CO2. There is this offsetting aspect. We are all aware that forests play a determinant role in upkeeping biodiversity. On Madagascar, it is very important because there is a huge endemic wildlife there. But in those different countries in Africa, we are only in Africa. Reforestation has quite a different meaning or meanings. For some, reforestation is about recreating a mangrove in order to protect against the onslaught of the seas, but also to recreate fisheries or fishing resources they had lost because of the loss of the mangroves. And I saw a commune, a municipality, where they had, in Cameroon, unbearable temperatures. They had so high temperatures that they couldn't get out of their homes. In other regions, they see that without forests, there is huge erosion and they are left with bare rocks. In other countries or for other players, they want to develop other kinds of activities like agroforestry, which has been mentioned before. And this is Graines de Vie's concept. We bring together companies from the north who want to offset their global footprint or environmental footprint with local associations or players who have needs. This is our core business. Graines de Vie is a network of 7 associations, 3 in Europe and 4 in Africa, in the countries you've mentioned. And together with our sponsors, we identify projects. Our sponsors are offsetting companies, and project implementation is done on-site with municipalities and all who are voluntary to do this. This is our concept. So it's more than about more than environment. Graines de Vie is an association which has been authorized by the Development Cooperation Ministry. That is, we help development, and there are a lot of impacts in addition to environmental impacts. Which are the expected results? Just a few figures. Graines de Vie in these different countries, but especially in Madagascar, it's 250 locations, that is 250 municipalities who are concerned with a tree nursery which turns out 10 to 20,000 new trees each year. This is our core business. And what we can be proud of are 12 projects in national parks. We reforest areas in these parks, aiming at extending them, but taking good care of using local endemic plants and trees and seedlings, and of course we avoid all kind of industrial tree planting. And another project I mentioned already are mangroves. Mangroves are highly necessary with the current climate change, and mangroves capture more CO2 than any other plantations, and we have ongoing projects. We have just surveyed over 300 kilometers of coastline in Madagascar, and we found locations where there is need for action. We have a beautiful project in Benin combined with the protection of an ape species which is very highly endangered. These are the current results Graines de Vie can boast of. Thank you very much. You mentioned a certain number of positive points, of positive consequences and impacts of reforestation with regard to carbon capture. We read often about carbon offsetting, and often it is presented as the magic bullet. What is Graines de Vie's take on carbon offsetting? How do you see this in a very global context? Clearly, we are at the end of the chain, and well, the logic is ask a question: how much do I emit? You have your carbon footprint calculation. How can I reduce my impact? And if you reduce your impact, you can't reduce it to zero as of now. So what is left needs to be compensated for. And carbon offsetting is through reforestation is only one of the offsetting solutions, but that is where we are and what we do. And if you need to offset, to compensate, this is simple math. You need to take what trees will capture, but it is not as simple as it looks, because these trees are living beings. So you have weather issues. They won't capture the same amount of CO2 any time. And for companies who are desirous to offset their carbon emissions, we take a very conservative approach. We say that in our countries, one tree will compensate 5 kilograms a year. In the literature, you can see 20 to 25 kilograms a year. Why did we opt for 5 kilograms? Because there are risks and dangers, and all trees won't grow like we want them to. There might be some incidents, very rainy seasons, but also very dry years, and we took this very conservative approach of 5 kilograms per tree and per year for carbon offsetting. And what we are keen on is supporting projects in the long run. Most projects, standard reforestation projects by international institutions, state institutions or companies, are 3 years-based projects. But if you plant trees, 3 years is short. It's good for planting, but we stay on, and we've been staying on for more than 10 years in some places to watch our plantations, to see to it that they are not jeopardized, and to bring in some additional action. And you need some checks, and we do this ourselves on site, but it is not enough, and our sponsors, or the most keen of them, will travel and see on site what they have contributed to, and this will enhance their motivation. And to do this in a more scientific way, we made a contract with a local university. They audit our plantations and give us some advice. And another step, which is still impending, is that we have started a certification process in order to be able to emit or to deliver carbon certificates to our sponsors. Thank you, Edouard, for sharing with us and for this very nuanced take on carbon offsetting. Thank you so much. We've seen innovative action taken by industry, changes in strategy in the financial industry, but there is another alternative we still haven't been talking about. Célia, welcome back on this set. What I'm aiming at is circularity, carbon circularity. This is something we still haven't talked about today. Could you tell us more about it? Yes, carbon circularity, or carbon capture and utilization, CCU, is the concept that you capture CO2 in industrial flue gases or from the air, and you convert this CO2 into everyday products, which have a high carbon footprint as of now, as a substitute to this produce. The aim is reducing CO2 emissions, but also defossilizing processes, because you replace fossil carbon, which is currently used to manufacture everyday products. Several examples: so-called mineralization. Industrial waste will react with CO2, and you can create building materials. It uses few energy, because these wastes contain energy and minerals, and they will react with CO2. You will have limestone. You know what limestone is, and we have technology technologies to accelerate this process, because the natural process will take thousands of years. We generate aggregates which can be used as a substitute to concrete for cement in building materials. So we can produce building materials with less cement, and cement is one of the major problem or carbon emitters in building materials. We also have the so-called power to X technologies. You take the CO2 from the air, from industrial gas flues, you make it react with green hydrogen, that is hydrogen from electrolysis, from renewable power, and you can synthesize renewable fuels which haven't been made of plant materials. And these processes require a lot of renewable power. That is, you need to use them if you can't use the electricity directly. But this allows us to replace fossil carbon-based fuels by CO2-based fuels. Carbon is not the issue. Everything is made of carbon. Our bodies are made of carbon, but we put a lot of fossil carbon on top of the world's surface, and this is the issue, because this is due to human impact. We want to decarbonize emissions and defossilize processes, so we should stop extracting fossil carbon. The idea is of having a carbon circularity and achieving the highest circularity possible between the processes. You mentioned concrete examples for applying these principles, but which are the most promising avenues for the future? Before I talk about avenues, I could talk about concrete projects. In Europe, we have 125 projects which are highly innovative in this, and these have reached technology readiness level. These projects are short before being able to be marketed. We have projects which consist in using CO2 in steel makers like ArcelorMittal to create urea. Urea is a fertilizer which is widely used and have a major carbon footprint. And other projects aim at using CO2 to generate kerosene in Norway. They react CO2 with green hydrogen to create green kerosene as a fuel for transport networks, for airlines, for example. This is renewable energy which can be used. And they want to decrease by 50% the carbon footprints of the 5 most frequented airlines in Norway in the coming years. But we also have other projects aiming at generating methane made of CO2 that would be renewable methane instead of fossil methane to reduce the impacts. And with regard to mineralization, Ghent in Belgium was one of the first cities to use CO2-based bricks to build their pavements, and these are marketed the world over. We need to target industries where we don't have any other alternatives. Energy efficiency comes first, but like in air transport or sea transport, there are few solutions, and we need to use this CO2 capture. But methanol is also an avenue with numerous projects Europe-wide. And we need to think how we can implement these solutions at a large scale with the corresponding regulation and legislation in Europe and in the different EU member states. In the Fit for 55 strategy, Europe is aiming at carbon circularity, but we need to change our business model radically in industry. What is a problem, an issue for an industry can become an opportunity for another, and we could create energy synergies between different industries. Thank you, Célia. And for this part of our conference today, I would like to stress as a conclusion that what can be considered as an issue can also be considered as an opportunity for others or by others. And we mentioned a lot of solutions today. This could create new markets, new opportunities, and this is what it is about for all organizations which need to exist further to develop and develop new and innovative solutions. As we have seen, solutions are various. There is no miracle single solution, no magic bullet. And joint efforts by different players in society are requested. We had representatives of industries, of the public sector, of the finance industry, and joint action is needed and will allow reaching our targets and containing the increase in global temperatures. We are in the decade of action, so like our speakers, please do all act. Thank you. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all of you who have been with us today. We will have a break now before we resume at 5:20. Thank you.